It is a real pleasure to be able to run this roundtable with you all. And as you know, at the Milken Institute, we do both large public panels, but we also do you have a clicker, by the way? I was supposed to have a clicker, I think. Okay, anyway, this might be it, okay. And then we do these private sessions where we try to engage in a conversation about topics of interest and the topic at hand. And so we have until 11 o'clock. We got a couple of minutes taken off of our time. But I want to make this interactive for sure. And by making it interactive, that means don't go on and on. You know, I will come around to you a number of times if you want, but please try not to go on at length. And I'd like to have lay down a couple of ground rules for this session. We are all here because we know Africa, we understand Africa, we're either investors in Africa or we care about the content. Therefore, I am eliminating the following interjections. You know, Africa is not just one country. You know, Africa really needs to strengthen its institutions. You know, Africa needs to develop its human capital. You know, corruption and the rule of law is really important for foreign direct investors, okay? Like, we know that. We want to dig in, get some dirt under our fingernails, and really talk about kind of the how and the why for foreign direct investment and portfolio investment in the continent. And the theme is going to be the importance and how-to of integration across the continent. How can we build scale on the continent, and how can we make that work so that investors are not kind of captured by the size of individual economies? And I mean this both at a portfolio level, at an FDI level, and at an operational kind of logistics level, okay? So with no further ado, let me please introduce my amazing quasi-panelists. President Chissano, who is, of course, if you don't know him, then you shouldn't be in this room. He is one of the most famous elder statesmen on the continent. He was the president of Mozambique that took it from a war-torn country to a well-functioning democracy, really a beacon of light. He was president for, I said 20 years. He said, don't make me older, it's only 18 years. And now he is, he was the first recipient of the Mo Ibrahim Award for successful transition out of office, et cetera, et cetera. His Excellency Salahuddin Muzzar, who is not to my next, but was the minister of so many things in Morocco, most recently Minister of Foreign Affairs, also Minister of the Finance and the Economy, then president of COP22, and is now an advisor to Africa 50, which he'll explain to you, but it's a very important infrastructure fund on the continent. Claire Akamanzi, who is, I'm proud to say, also a friend of mine, runs the Rwandan Development Board after being its chief operational officer for 8 years or so, right? And is now head of it. This kind of thing makes you feel really, just not very good about what you've accomplished in your life, but that's okay. Josh Chandler, who is the CEO and founder of Lori Systems. He, was a banker, has a lot of experience on the continent, saw an opportunity and a problem to fix, and kind of just built a company to do that. So all of these folks are going to bring a kind of a different perspective to the opportunities that we have in Africa. So, Mr. President, why don't I start with you? How do you think about the importance of integration, economic integration on the continent, and how do you see the strategic way forward to accomplish that?
Well, that is a long story, but I will be short because I would go from the time we came to independence, and then we had this frontline states, SADC, and so on. The idea was really integration. We didn't use that word. I'm glad that now we have come in Africa back to that theme. And last but one summit, we have adopted that strategy, that agenda for 50 years to come when we celebrated 50 years of independence, because it was about political unity to fight against colonialism. But now we see that we have to unite in order to fight poverty and to bring in development. And so the essential in all this exercise, which brought up the creation of the African Union instead of OAU, is that we came to think that we should not wait for handouts, for gifts, but we should generate our own resources to be more self-sufficient. And this is what would create the possibility of interacting among ourselves, cooperating, and then build our economy, as you say, of scale, because Africa is huge, and therefore we can have our intra-African trade. But first of all, we have to know how to transform our own resources, all the things which you already know. So.
But let me push you on this point a little bit, because in order to develop a regional integrative model, each country has to give up sometimes something of what they want. And so how do you counsel statesmen to think about the whole, even if it means giving up some short-term, more parochial interests? What is your advice there? You know,
yeah, that's why we decided to bring this integration through building blocks. We have these communities, development communities, because they can coordinate and have this, develop this spirit of giving a bit of their sovereignty and to coordinate their economies. If we take this for the whole of Africa, it will seem to be a bit more difficult. And the success which we are getting in SADC, and ECOWAS, and East Africa, and so on, they show that we are almost there. We are on at least in a good path. Because one of the things that Africans did not know each other. Each one was by himself trying to develop and compete. We were in some sort of competition. We would come to the Middle East, each one asks for one thing for his own country. But today we say, for instance, if I was in power in Mozambique, I would come here to Middle East and say, I have the responsibility of coordinating the infrastructure, especially for transport, for telecommunication, and I'm a country of the sea, which serves the interland. Yeah. And so what I want is for you to look at Mozambique that way, in its own space, which covers other countries, yeah, from Mozambique up to the RC. Yeah. So to look at the region and SADC, and I'm happy that we are here at MENA, and so MENA should now have this SADC, for instance, as a partner, have ECOWAS as a partner, yeah, and not just look for one country.
One country, yeah.
But to see the efforts which Africa is trying to do.
Now, Claire, you are Rwanda is the head of the African Union this year, and I think you are, under the leadership of your president, really pursuing a prioritization of integration across the continent. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then also from kind of Rwanda's point of view, how have you, at a policy level, tried to, you're such a little economy, you could do everything right and still not succeed if you don't get better integration. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and I must say it's a pleasure to be joining you here at the Milken Institute at the MENA Summit, and particularly on the Africa panel. Yes, the African continent is integrating a lot deeper than has been in the past, and I think President Chisano did talk about intra-African trade. And before I talk about that, let's also just look at how Africa is doing in general. Africa has reformed to support businesses tremendously over the past few years. In fact, the World Bank Doing Business report most recently named Africa as one of the most reformed regions in the world. 5 out of 10 most reformed economies were actually African countries. And guess who the most reformed country had been for the last 15 years of the Doing Business report of the World Bank? It was Rwanda. And so, thank you. And so Africa is really reforming and making it easier and easier for businesses to thrive. And again, McKinsey did show that the top 700 companies on the African continent, if you compared them with their peers globally, they were more profitable and they were doing a lot better and had better prospects than their peers across the world. However, 700 companies accounting for $1.4 trillion of revenues is still very few companies and very small companies compared to the big companies of the world. And so the opportunity to grow these companies and to compete within the region is very big. Again, Africa is known for exporting mostly commodities, coffee, tea, oil, minerals, among others. But if you look at what Africa makes, the manufactured products that Africa produces, 80% of those are sold within the African continent. That means that integrating markets within the African continent probably holds one of the biggest opportunities the African continent has. But what are we doing to integrate? Last week, I was in Addis with my president, who is the current African Union chairperson, and 3 very strong decisions were made that support integration. The first one was that the text for a continental free trade area was passed. For the very first time, African countries agreed on an agreement that leads towards a free trade area, removing barriers, removing tariffs, so that Africans can trade with each other without barriers that are tariff-related or non-tariff related. That was very important. Number 2, the protocol for free movement of people was passed. It was so difficult 10 years ago to move from one part of the African continent to the other because you needed a visa that would take so long to get. But with this free movement protocol, Africans are going to start moving within the African continent, and already over 15 countries allow visas on arrival for African nationals. My country was among the first countries that allowed any African passport holder to come to Rwanda and get a visa on arrival without getting a prior visa. As of January 2018, we changed this for the whole world. Anyone from anywhere in the world, from the Caribbean or South America, Africa, doesn't have to get a visa before coming to Rwanda. You can all get a visa on arrival when you come to Rwanda. So things are changing. I think the last integration decision that was made last week was a single air transport agreement that was also passed and launched in Addis last week, where Africans are beginning to create one single aviation space within the African continent. Now, these are first steps. Of course, they have to be ratified. Countries need to sign them. The last week we made the decision, the texts were agreed, but countries need to sign them and they need to ratify them in their different processes in their countries. But I think it's a very true story. If Africa really continues to deepen its integration, the market for value-added products, not just commodities going out of the continent, is going to begin becoming a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Your Excellency, and I will say that although his English is very good, he would prefer to speak in Arabic. So please, if you don't speak Arabic, put your headphones on. Your Excellency, I would like to ask you to wear 2 hats when you make your intervention. One, as a foreign minister, how did you think about integration in the continent and the opportunities for Morocco looking south? And second, as an advisor to Africa 50, obviously good integration is going to require infrastructure, Pan-African kinds of infrastructure. And so how is tell us what Africa 50 is and how you're prioritizing that.
Thank you, Stacey. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry if I speak in Arabic, but it's a good language, very interesting language. Thank you very much. أدعوكم أولاً أن تنظروا إلى إفريقيا بنظرة مختلفة. إفريقيا في القرن 21 دخلت مسار جديد.
Can you, wait, can everybody, do we have the translation? I don't have the translation yet.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go, okay.
That's
Yeah.
okay?
Okay, yeah.
Everybody? Yes. إفريقيا القرن 20 كانت في مرحلة بناء دول في عدم استقرار بعد الاستقلال. ما تعيشه إفريقيا منذ بداية هذا القرن يدخل في تحول إيجابي. إفريقيا لها قادة جدد بمنظور براغماتي قوي، ولها نخب جديدة بمقاربات قوية ونظرة وطنية لتطوير بلدانهم. إفريقيا سجلت معدلات نمو متقدمة، 5% في العشرية الأولى، 4.3 في هذه العشرية، بمعنى أنه إفريقيا ثاني منطقة نمو في العالم. لكن معدلات نمو إفريقيا اليوم غير كافية نظراً للحاجيات والجاب على المستوى الاجتماعي وانتظارات الساكنة. الكثير ينظر إلى إفريقيا من منظور الهجرة، لكن الهجرة ما بين الدول الإفريقية تتعدى بكثير داخل الدول الإفريقية ما ننظره في اتجاه أوروبا ومناطق أخرى. إفريقيا تسجل معدلات اندماج متقدمة. للتذكير، هناك 5 مناطق في إفريقيا للاندماج الاقتصادي، وهذه المناطق تعرف تطور جد متقدم. المبادلات الخارجية لإفريقيا تضاعفت 4 مرات في العقدين الأخيرين، لكن إفريقيا كما قلت هي في حاجة إلى معدلات نمو أكبر. هناك حاجتين أساسيتين يجب على إفريقيا أن تسير بهم بوتيرة أسرع. الجانب الأول هو المرتبط بالبنيات الأساسية، وأساساً الطاقة. ثانياً النقل، ولهذا إفريقيا بدأت تخلق أدوات لمواكبة استثماراتها. حاجيات إفريقيا للاستثمار في هذين المجالين هي 150 بليون دولار سنوياً. ما تتوفر عليه إفريقيا اليوم هو 110 بليون دولار سنوياً. هناك جاب ديال 40 مليار دولار، ولهذا أفريقيا 50 مثلاً كأداة من أدوات تطوير الاستثمار في البنيات التحتية بإفريقيا تقوم بهذا الدور. إذا نحن نتكلم عن قارة بدأت تعيش تحول بوتيرة أسرع، ونتكلم عن قارة لها قدرات لكي تواجه الحاجيات التي يتطلبها الاستثمار الخاص. انظروا إلى تطور مناخ الأعمال بإفريقيا. هناك تطور جد إيجابي ومهم في مناطق متعددة. أمامي مسؤولة عن رواندا، ويمكنكم أن تنظروا إلى رواندا يعني تجربة نموذجية. لا أريد أن أتكلم عن بلاد المغرب التي سجلت تطوراً يعني ملموساً في هذا المجال، لكن ما أريد أن أؤكد عليه، لا تنظروا إلى إفريقيا بمنظور متشائم، بمنظور الدول الغير القادرة على بناء تحولها. هذا منظور خاطئ. إفريقيا تتحمل مسؤوليتها اليوم، وهناك كما قلت قيادات جديدة. في المؤتمر الأخير، في القمة الأخيرة للاتحاد الإفريقي، اتخذت قرارات جد قوية في مجال مثلا حرية التنقل على مستوى الطيران، وهذا تقدم جد إيجابي لأنه سيحدث تحول إيجابي في إفريقيا. منطقة التجارة الحرة على المستوى الإفريقي. إذن هناك قرارات جريئة تأخذها إفريقيا وهناك تقدم. أدعوكم بأن تنظروا إلى هذا بشكل إيجابي. لكن إفريقيا في نفس الوقت في حاجة إلى مستثمرين الخواص، في حاجة إلى دعم للرفع من الوتيرة، وهذا سيفتح مجال بالطبع للمستثمرين، ولكن يحل إشكالية أخرى في العلاقة ما بين الدول المتقدمة والدول السائرة في طريق النمو. نحن نرى الأزمة التي تعيشها أوروبا اليوم بارتباط مع الهجرة بشكل عام، وأعتقد بأنه من الإيجابي أن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار ضرورة الانخراط في الدينامية الإفريقية.
Okay, thank you very much. You both have mentioned the importance of infrastructure. Claire, you talked about 80% of trade going in a intra-African, and so that means trade means getting things from point A to point B as cheaply as possible is a very important component of that. So, Josh, what are you doing about that?
So, and thank you everyone for having me. I've always been obsessed with macroeconomic systematic challenges on the continent. I'm originally from South Africa and always plan to return. We found in our research, actually Claire was very supportive of this research, that on the continent, a massive amount of the cost of a product goes to the logistics. When you buy a good in Kenya, 25 to 40% of the cost of that good goes straight to logistics. A Rwandan export, 75% of that good goes to logistics because it's double landlocked, all imports and exports. We have been working closely with governments, as well as mainly the private sector, though, to address this from a private sector perspective. Through our research, and this is a massive industry, right? $12 billion of cost in East Africa, $180 billion across the continent. Through our research, we were seeing there was just no systematic coordination from the private sector, and there was no centralized coordination or flexibility. When trucks would go to the port to pick up from one cargo owner, they would sit for 4 days. They would then get to the border, sit for 3 days. All these emerging market externalities happen accordingly, and they just sit and wait. And from the transporter side, you have a 7% asset utilization. This drives up costs to another level. So what we've been building, we saw a private sector opportunity. A few of us were at grad school at Harvard. We did our dissertation on it. We moved back to the continent, and this is what our focus has been since. Lorry Systems has been trying to address this from the private sector. We've been coordinating the trucks, sending thousands of tons every day through our captive trucks to Kenya, to Rwanda as of yesterday, and Uganda as well. And so this has been our big focus, is seeing how the private sector could address this, and there's a lot of private sector opportunities there to do this. Just to give you guys numbers, we launched in May. By November, we're doing $8 million of run rate revenue. By this month, $16 million of run rate revenue. There's a huge opportunity for private sector investment in East Africa and across the continent. And next, hopefully, we'll be going to your part of the region, back to the SADC, and then hopefully to North Africa as well. But there's some really interesting opportunities, is I think the underlying aspect of that comment.
Okay. Are you bullish?
Extremely. I do think there's a lot of challenges. Finding entrepreneurs who will lose as much hair as you need them to lose in this process every single day is intellectually challenging, physically challenging, emotionally challenging. It's really, really tough. It's not an easy task to constantly have issues go wrong every day, whether it's something breaking in the port and having to fly something in from Europe and truck sitting for 4 days, or any of the issues that happen, running out of bags, no visibility, no systems. It's really challenging. But what is encouraging for us is that through a lot of effort, a lot of work on the ground grind, you can decrease port loading times, or you can approach these challenges. We've been able to decrease port loading times by 65%. Our border crossing times have decreased by 25%. This is allowing goods to get to places faster. And so I do think that with enough just grind and with the right team, you can get things done. But it isn't an easy task by any means, but it is a hell of an experience and a wonderfully challenging one at that.
Okay. The one, and I'm going to turn it open to the rest of the room after I call on Veronica Nyamwa, I can never say your name, Nyamwaya, who is the Milken Institute, together with the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, brings every year to Washington 20 of the best minds in capital market development, monetary policy from Africa and other developing and emerging markets to study in the United States for a semester at GW and then do an internship with a firm in the United States and then go back to their countries. They promise to go back to their countries and help make them better. And Veronica is now, has been promoted actually on the back of this program and is now a senior officer at the Capital Markets Authority of Kenya. And I'm going to call on you now to talk a little bit about the agenda for capital markets integration in the EAC in particular, and how you see that, and how you see the importance of a larger scale of capital markets funding.
Okay, thank you, Stacey, for that, and I'm grateful to be here today. And talking about the East African community integration, we currently have an association with, that is Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Uganda, where we get to meet and see how we can integrate our markets, as we understand that all these are just small markets right now, although Kenya right now happens to be the largest, but we cannot compare that to other markets in the world. So what we are doing right now is working together with these other countries to see how we can integrate the capital markets. And the good thing about this is that we are able to widen the base of raising capital in Africa. We are having a few challenges, but we are working through it to ensure that all of us are within the same page. As one of us had mentioned, it's not about competition. And at times we have to put down our requirements so that we can incorporate everybody and put aside our suspicions. Sometimes we are suspecting each other, like, why does this one want us to integrate? Maybe, you know, there's this big brother syndrome. They want to come and dominate our market. But it's putting that aside and looking at the bigger picture. We are able to attract more capital when we are integrated and when we have a large base through which even foreign investment can come in, and also a large base of East African nationals where companies that want to raise capital can raise capital. So we already have companies that are cross-listing in these other markets, but we also want to look at how we can work out the debt market as well within the region so that we can be able to raise bonds of substantial amount. When you look at bonds raised by each country, the amounts are quite not so significant at the moment, but we are looking at widening that so that it's not just 5 small economies that we are looking at, but one large region. Yeah.
And which is about, what is it, about 150 billion in GDP for the region? I mean, it's nothing to sneeze at, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of raising finance, Miguel, you know, Citi, as you've looked after the continent for Citi for quite a while now, what are you doing to help? And what do you think?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I think this idea of playing the integration game, it's very right at the macro level, but it's also very real at the micro level, which is really where we play a role. And over the last few years, we have been talking to companies across the continent, basically saying, you can raise capital, but you cannot be a one-country company, because that's tough to sell. So companies have done greenfield investments, acquisitions, and it's actually a good timing, and that's also the sort of the hope message I'm leaving here, that in 2018, you know, and assuming the market correction is short-lived, which I think it is, we are bringing to the market 4 IPOs of Pan-African platforms, one in telecom towers, one in petrol stations, one in optic fiber, and one in microfinance. all these will be large IPOs, i.e. more than $500 million per transaction, companies worth between $1 and $10 billion. So the game of integration is actually paying off, and I think that's the message. If you want to make, if you want to bring capital into Africa, if you want to have access to capital, which is, one of the big mantras of this discussion here, build a platform and the market is open for you.
What is your top wish list for policymakers to encourage this from a kind of a banking perspective? What's the one thing that you wish they would do and prioritize?
On a sort of a more humoristic note, I would say many times is stay away. Just allow market to work, just allow companies to do their job. But I think effectively what it means is bring investment-friendly approach to politics. And the countries that have done it are seeing the payoff.
Okay, terrific. Okay, let me open it up to, and then I will turn to the four of you at the end to kind of give some comments. But let me open it up to.
Can't we comment
just
that point?
Of course, yes, please.
The stay away. The stay away. I think that is not the word. To be together, it's better. You don't tell the government stay away, and we private will not do alone, but together. So, but all the rest is important.
I agree, President. I agree.
Otherwise, I think maybe you're going to write a note when you go back to Mozambique and say Citi is trying to get the government out of.
No. In one time in the past, that was the trend.
Yeah, right, for sure. It's
less government, no government.
Right. Now smart government is what we want.
Now you want smart government.
Yeah.
Partnership.
Yeah. Okay, please introduce yourself and yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mark Desario. I'm the CEO of InvestBridge Capital, Dubai-based asset management, alternative investments, a lot of activity in the African continent. To take from Josh's statements about a real live example of an SME building up, but then to the capital markets and the IPO discussions, when you look at Africa and it's sort of a collage of economies in terms of the capital markets, as you're talking about these IPOs in Pan-Africa, there's still to date, I wouldn't say the go-to market where you bring it, so everybody starts talking about these IPOs but being outside of Africa. How do you address, either dual listings or, because when you start to get to the cross borders, now you're talking about different currencies, you're talking about different regulations. Do you see a leadership role coming? Because North Africa, obviously, Cairo is very different than Kenya and the Uganda exchanges and things like this. So how are you approaching this going to the capital markets?
Yes, very good question. In fact, one other IPO I did not mention is a very large Nigerian company. It will be Lagos only. So this is to say that there are certain exchanges that are already open for international investors. The East Africa situation is a very clear one. You need to have efficient platforms where, and I'm now talking about investors outside Africa. Investors within Africa, that's a different angle. But investors outside Africa, they can live with the FX risk, and that's the underlying business is FX exposed, so that's not a problem. They factor that in. But they need an exchange, a platform to trade that is simple to use and that they are used to. And the reality is they're not going to have 54 platforms. So right now, the only one that is working is Joburg, Johannesburg. Johannesburg is a relevant platform because there's a massive pool of savings, but it's not seen as an international platform. Effectively, the real international platform for Pan-African IPOs is either London or maybe Amsterdam is becoming a relevant one. But I think there's room to do much more.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that the Kenyan shilling can be volatile against the dollar, and the Rwandan franc can be volatile against the dollar, but the Kenyan shilling and the Rwandan franc are not that volatile against each other. So these countries, part of this is that you've got to stop, and markets have to stop this weird translation back to dollars and start This comes, of course, from deeper financial markets. Any other comments around the room before I turn back to our panelists? From our hosts? Anybody? Okay. Yes, please. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is E, and I'm CEO of Flutterwave and also co-founded a company called Antella. As we think through these investment opportunities, I've heard a lot about infrastructure and the gaps and the need for investment, but I haven't heard a lot about the human capital. And as we saw from the presentation this morning that Mr. Milken gave, what you realize and what I've also seen from being on the continent building high-growth technology ventures over the last 7 years is that the human capital element is quite frankly where everything crumbles. Because you can create infrastructure, but it would not be long-term if you don't even have people to maintain it. And you can invest, but if you don't have operators and you don't have people who can actually get the companies to run, and it's difficult to find the right talent, you can't scale, the company's economic potential is ultimately going to be limited. So when are investors going to practically support the government? Because this is one area where you can actually work with the government. They need a lot of help. African governments still remain one of the governments investing the highest in education in the world, and despite their meager resources. When are investors going to think longer term and dedicate at least a portion of their resources to building local human capacity? Because no matter how impressive the businesses you invest in are, they won't scale if you don't solve that problem.
Yeah, here, and it's of course a learning by doing kind of proposition. Yeah.
Iyad Malask, a partner at Gateway Partners, a private equity fund actually investing, including in Africa. I think I agree with many of the speakers. There are a lot of opportunities. I think the challenge for some of us investors is, and that's obviously it's difficult to generalize in Africa because Africa is different in many ways, is access. I mean, when we invest in some companies, then eventually we want to exit. We know we're taking foreign currency risk, but many times, even when you want to repatriate your capital, you have then major restrictions and other factors beyond the risk that you've taken, knowing that you're investing in a local currency environment. So maybe some people can comment about what is being done. And again, I don't want to generalize because some countries are much more open on the foreign account base.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions before or comments before I turn it back to our panelists? Okay, quiet group, okay. Josh, why don't we start with you and then we'll kind of go up the line. Talk about the human capacity question as well. Give any, how has it been to find financing for you? And how do you think about how governments are helpful or not helpful, or the role of governments in pursuing your own business?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and appreciate that. So in terms of finding capital, that's on top of mind because we closed a raise last 2 weeks ago. And where the challenge lay there is we ended up becoming 4 times oversubscribed, but without anyone wanting to lead the deal. And it took a while to find that lead, for someone to step up and be like, okay, I'm going to do an Africa deal. The local investors from Kenya, 35% of our funds are local, probably 50 from Europe, and 10% from the US. We've spent most of our time raising in the US. US investors didn't come in, and Dubai came in for probably 5%. Emirates came in for 5%. So, but what our biggest challenge was finding a lead and finding someone who's comfortable driving a deal on the continent, getting to know the continent, et cetera. They saw the metrics, they saw where we're going, but really doing the diligence. It's a different area and it's a challenge, so it's slower. In terms of exit opportunities, we have been approached by already like the big logistics firms globally. I mean, there are exit opportunities. There's a lot of private equity investments. Carlyle, KKR, TPG, all have billion-dollar-plus focuses on Africa. So there is that interest from the PE firms to go into that space, especially logistics or an infrastructure play. In terms of talent, yeah, that's our biggest constraint to growth right now. It's finding people to, a lot of the people who were educated abroad from the continent are still abroad. It's getting folks back home. It's getting training up. It's Andela. I don't know if you guys know, but this is like one of the biggest entrepreneurs on the continent in the history, and it is amazing. But Andela, one of the companies, one of the many amazing companies he founded, is doing a huge job in training thousands and thousands of engineers on the continent and getting them up to global standards. And that's going to become a big talent pool going forward, so there is a lot of effort. But training is definitely a big focus of our organization and tough.
Okay. Your Excellency, I think we've heard a lot of comments about the importance of infrastructure. So can you talk about Africa 50 and the infrastructure in particular?
أفريقيا 50 هو صندوق تم تأسيسه من طرف الدول الإفريقية بمساهمة البنك الإفريقي للتنمية. هو جواب على إشكال كان مطروح داخل إفريقيا ومرتبط بتمويل أو دعم تمويل المشاريع المرتبطة بالبنيات التحتية. هذا الصندوق يلعب كذلك دور risk country لأنه يقدم ضمانات هو والبنك الإفريقي للتنمية. إذن هذا جواب على حاجيات، وهو يلعب هذا الدور، يمول اليوم مشاريع مرتبطة بالطاقات المتجددة، بالبنيات التحتية، بمختلف المشاريع، ويدخل في إطار شراكات مع مستثمرين خواص، مع صناديق إلى آخره لمواكبة المشاريع. إذن يقدم ضمانات إلى جانب الضمانات كذلك والانخراط التي تقوم به البنك الإفريقي للتنمية، ويساعد الدول على إنجاز مشاريعها. سمعت كثيرا عن في بعض المداخلات حول إشكالية العنصر البشري أو القدرات البشرية. أعتقد بأن هناك نوع من يعني المبالغة. إفريقيا فيها كفاءات وفيها طاقات. أخذ تجربة بلدي لما بدأنا في بناء اقتصادنا العصري لم تكن لنا كل الكفاءات، ولكن هناك مستثمرين وضعوا الثقة في بلدنا، والكفاءات تطورت مع تطور المشاريع. الكفاءات لا تأتي من السماء، الكفاءات تأتي من التجارب ومن تطوير المشاريع ومن بناء المشاريع. ما ينقص كثيرا المستثمرين الخواص كذلك في علاقتهم مع إفريقيا هو النظرة المتوسطة والبعيدة. أعتقد بأنه لا يمكن أن نعالج القضايا المرتبطة بالاستثمار من منظور قصير المدى فقط. أعتقد بأنه لا بأس أن ننظر كذلك إلى الطاقات. إفريقيا لها طاقات، إفريقيا لها مستقبل، إفريقيا تتعلم، إفريقيا تتقدم. ساعدوها على أن تسير بوتيرة أكثر. لكم ضمانات، والكثير في استثماره له يعني investment retour جد مهم. إذن لا أعتقد بأنه علينا أن نخرج من منطق، وهذا هو يعني الرسالة التي أريد أن أوصلها اليوم، هو أنه لا بد أن نغير منظورنا ومقاربتنا. إفريقيا ليست متجانسة، إفريقيا مختلفة من بلد إلى بلد، لكن إفريقيا تندمج جهويا لكي تندمج إقليميا قاريا، وهذا هذا يسمح أولا بأن يكون هناك سوق أوسع. عندما نتكلم في الاستثمار في الطاقات مثلا أو الطاقات المتجددة، عندما يكون لك سوق أكبر يستفيد كذلك الساكنة من كوست يعني أقل. إذن هذه كلها أشياء أطلب منكم أن تنظروا إليها بمنظور جديد وإيجابي، وأن تدعموا هذا المسار في بناء إفريقيا.
Right, and it's particularly embarrassing to be from the United States on this question, and you can't raise funding, and J.P. Morgan cancels an investor roadshow in East Africa because the Ebola crisis is happening in Liberia. It's ridiculous. Claire, why don't I give you kind of an open-ended opportunity to respond to some of the things that you've heard, and then in particular, kind of your predictions for the future on integration issues.
Thank you, Stacey. Probably what I want to talk about is, I think when investors are thinking about Africa and countries to go to, it's not enough to sit in your capital and have a checklist and check which country fits within, checks most of the elements in a checklist. I think what we've seen, at least in Rwanda, is successful investors are willing to sit down with willing governments and figure it out and make it happen, and structure deals almost differently from what you're used to doing in your capitals in order to make it work within the context of that particular economy. I'll give you a few examples. On the issues of skills and talent, very important. In Rwanda, with the 1994 genocide that we had a big problem of skills. And we wanted to attract very high talented schools to train Rwandans. We went to Carnegie Mellon University, one of the top engineering schools in the world, and we told them, are you able to enter a PPP with the government, something they hadn't done before? Come to African continent, let's enter into a PPP. And we had to give them some guarantees, and we had to work out a structure that reduces their risks, but also encourages them to do what we want them to do, which is bring skills in the country. And that helped very much. And we've had very many other creative ways of dealing with the skills issue beyond what the normal work is. We've had companies that have had to go into technical and vocational training that they were not doing in their core business. Marriott, for example, wanted to open a hotel in Rwanda, a 5-star hotel. They couldn't find the skills they wanted. They had to get a lot more Rwandans than they needed for their hotel, take them to Dubai in their different outlets, train them, and then bring them, some of whom they took on board and some of whom were available on the market. So doing very specific, creative ways of solving problems has been very crucial. I'll give you other examples in other areas. Drones. We had this company from Silicon Valley, Zipline, that had developed drones to supply blood and address very big infrastructure problems on the African continent. And they wanted a place to try it out. Many countries turned them away because they didn't have regulations that would support drones. We sat with them in Rwanda and we said, we don't have regulations either, but let's figure it out together. And so we did our homework with them. We came up with regulations that could support drones operating in Rwanda. They tried it in Rwanda very successfully, and now they're moving to Tanzania. They've proven the concept, and now they're scaling up and going elsewhere. One last example, Stacey. DSM is a food company from Netherlands. They are used to food producing. They don't know how to work with farmers. They're used to outsourcing, supply of raw materials to the business. They came to Rwanda, started, but our farmers were not used to working with the company. And so, managing a contract between farmers that have never worked with a big supplier, a big company, processing company. In the end, they had to go into processing of maize, something they hadn't done before, so that they could fill in the supply chain gap. So the point I want to leave investors with here is I think don't just look at a checklist and say, does it fit, does it not fit? I think it's important to be very creative and figuring out with countries that are willing to do that, and we've seen very many examples in doing that. Thank you.
And if you're going to apply that same philosophy at a regional level, then I would just leave you with the thought that you're going to have to do some knowledge sharing, I would say, about how Rwanda has done these things well and help across at least the region on those kinds of issues. Mr. President, you are really one of the great men of Africa, truly. And when you are, you're not getting older, but you're older than you were. And when you sort of sit back and you think about the next generation of leaders, what kind of advice would you give them, and how do you think about going forward, and what does the continent need to do to really make it, as I believe it will be, the African century? The other side, I think. Yeah.
Well, I would say that the new leaders are starting in a better position than we did in the past. They can learn many things. They can get all the information they need in a useful time. But what is necessary is to have more interaction. As I said a while ago, we did not know each other, and still we don't know each other. And so they have to have more interaction between among leaders to learn from each other. Because this integration, I spoke about building blocks. The idea of building blocks is not to have the blocks develop alone as they are. We say, yes, ECOWAS and SADC or Maghreb there, but is later to link them, and then you have the building, and the building will be one. So this is what they have to have in mind. And for that, a lot of interaction is necessary. The second thing is that the private sector and how do you call it,
Civil society.
Civil society, you must have interaction with them, because all the problems we are putting here can find solutions. The private sector know what is missing, and the government knows what they want to have, but they don't have. They can find solution together with the I'm saying something which I did actually, because the private sector came to me and said, "Oh, President, we have difficulties, the regulations are not good." I said, "No, come sit down with the government and tell us how, if you were in government, what would you do to make things happen?" And that worked. And finally, this resulted in the creation of an organization in Mozambique of the private sector. And in the past, we were summoning them to come to meetings, but now are the ones who organize meetings and invite government and other partners.
Well, Mr. President.
And it goes the same way with the civil society.
And I am grateful for your plug for the Milken Institute and the mission of the Milken Institute, because this is, of course, what we do. We try to bring people together and get people that don't usually talk to each other in the same room so that they can solve problems. We have to end, unfortunately. We were cut off a little bit, but let me just end with one slide. Where's my slide person? Hello? What are you doing back there, guys? Okay, this is the last slide that I want to end with. This is what matters. This is what matters. This is the median age in Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Congo, Uganda, 20 years old, right? Japan, Germany, UK, Russia, US, China, 30 years old. This is what it means. This is the demographic dividend for Africa. So these guys are getting their act together. These guys have the opportunity. They are making this happen, and you would all be well served to pay attention to what's going on this continent going forward. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.